See, now it's not working. Worked before. You know, I'm going to start going into my office and using the office computer. This happens too often. One more time.
Good morning.
Oh, you know what? I just saw something. Let me.
While you're fiddling, can I ask a question?
I discovered the whole problem, but ask the question. Who's speaking? I got it.
So, hi, good morning, Rabbi, and everyone. I wanted to inquire whether our Torah class would like to have their next meeting at my home, which is just on the other side of the big lot from the temple. Some of you may have been here years ago when the former rabbi lived here, just as a change and for us to get to see each other over the holidays. So I've reached out to a few people, but I don't have everyone's email address. So is there anyone who has our class's total email address or any suggestions on how I can reach out to others? And then I wasn't sure when our next Torah study was going to be, whether it would be the 16th.
Well, all right. So you're asking, I'm going to take the screen share now. So you're asking two questions.
Yes, probably more, but.
The one question about a list, there is no list because the population varies. So it just goes out on the general email. Just goes out on the general temple email. Now, the other question you're asking is, you're inviting us to your home to have the next Torah study. Unless there's some break in the calendar, it's always every other week. So it's 2 weeks from today.
The 16th, yes.
So it's my understanding. I'm not opposed to it. I need to hear from all of you folks. It's my understanding that we meet on Zoom because people want to meet on Zoom and not in person. If you want to meet in person, and the the decision is, it's got to be nearly unanimous. I'm happy to meet. I'm happy to meet anywhere. So, what do you all have to say?
Well, I like meeting on Zoom because we live in Yucaipa and it's very far to come to the temple and come back, and I go there for Hebrew school and I try to come to services, and so this is very nice and convenient for me.
I do have Zoom capabilities. It wouldn't have, a number of the Torah studies I've seen in other temples are kind of a hybrid, and we try to hybrid at the temple. It's awkward. I was just reaching out because it's Hanukkah, and it's actually nice to see people. And some of the people who participate in Torah, we don't see at temple as often as you come.
This is true.
Anyhow, we don't. Yeah. And the fact that people don't see each other face to face anymore because of, partly because of COVID, it was wonderful. And yet, Christine and Jane and Sandy and Felice and other people that we used to see all together on Saturday mornings, it was nice. Not all the time, but once in a while would be nice.
What about if we did it after the New Year? There's so much going on before the New Year, and that would give us a chance to, reach out to people like Chris, like Felice, and I don't know who else. That would be nice to have a get together at your house.
I'm just, and it doesn't have to be Torah study. It's just, that's where I'm consistently seeing people the most. So,
well, I'd be in favor of doing it after the New Year's. Anybody else?
Suggest that maybe it not be every time, that maybe it could be every other time at somebody's house, only because it is hard for people. And if it was every week, every time we have Torah study, it might eliminate some people. And it is a little bit harder with hybrid. So maybe, once a month it's on Zoom and once a month it's at somebody's house.
I think she was just offering for for one time.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I mean, the alternative is you can come and drink any evening you'd like when you're in the neighborhood. I'm just trying to figure out a way for people to get more together. I heard the rabbi last night point out on Shabbat sometimes we're all exhausted at the end of the work week. So home is near the temple and it's big. And I'd love to have you hostess, but I know there are many women who would help with bring something. So that would be good.
Well, so I mean, I'm willing. I'm not averse to it. As it happens, I teach 2 other classes entirely. I've grown completely comfortable with the Zoom environment, and when a class is running well. We have this Thursday night class, which alas is going to end next week, where we meet on Zoom, and the sort of the dynamic has been just as good as if we were meeting in person. If we do it, it would have to be hybrid, and then hybrid has its difficulties, but it's not as difficult as my experience sort of on Friday night, when usually mostly what I do with the Zoom crowd is just wish them all a Shabbat Shalom, because it's a bigger number. I mean, last night where the attendance was light, we had still about 40, 45 people between being in person and on Zoom. So, I mean, let me put it, I'm going to ask a question and don't be afraid to raise your hand to these questions. So anybody who feels that an occasional hybrid meeting at somebody's home would how do you put this? How many people would be in favor of trying it to see how it works? Let me see. Opposition? Opposition?
I think Zoom is okay for me.
And you make it to the temple pretty regularly, Susie.
Yes.
Let's and I got Harvey. I don't know what your hand is up for. Whether it's the first question or the second
Opposition.
question.
I want to add that Rabbi Singer tried that where they did an in-person combined hybrid Torah study, and it didn't work. After 1 or 2 sessions, it went back to pure hybrid again.
Okay,
Most people just didn't show up.
And I don't want to beat this.
Okay.
Yes, but
Okay, let me just stop. Never mind. It's okay. I'll have people over for Shabbat dinner. I get it. I was just trying to say, hey, I even offered David, and I said, bring the kids on Sunday so Cara wouldn't pull her hair out. But if in the next upcoming year, as we try to get members of the temple more engaged and to see each other a little bit more often, I just wanted to throw the fact that I'm so close and there's lots of parking, as a possibility, because it is nice to see people. But I agree, Torah works great on Zoom. I'm glad we have Zoom. It means I can wear my overalls and don't have to put makeup on. So there you go.
Nobody on this call knows what people are wearing from the waist down.
You don't know what I'm wearing, that's for sure. You don't want to know.
I have a farm.
You don't want to know.
All right.
But getting together,
all right, sorry.
Good idea.
Thank
just
you.
Not for a Torah study,
Okay.
So now we're
Thank you.
okay.
Let's see. All right, I want to pick it up here. This is before the beginning of the Parsha. And Jacob's ready to go. And some of this is just going to be reading through the narrative. But of course, when we get to the sexy parts, we'll stop and have some discussion. Now here, I'm going to ask you to pay attention to a word because it's going to repeat itself later on. Vayashkem Lavan baboker, vayenashek levanav ulevanotav, vayevorech ethem, vayelech vayashav Lavan limkomo. So they're having a parting of the ways, and although there's been some tension, which I don't want to go back and review because I want to move forward. So early in the morning, Laban kissed his sons and his daughters, and he blessed them. And he went and returned, and Laban went and returned to his place, to his home. The word I want you to pay attention to is vayina shake, which is the word for to kiss. I don't know if you know any Hebrew at all, but a kiss is nishika, v'nashake is to kiss, and the word is going to pop up again. And I've been sort of, trained isn't the right word, but I've been taught to kind of when words appear in some kind of regularity, to pay attention to that, because it's a possibility that the author is telling you something by using the same word twice. So, Vayakov halach l'darko v'yifkeuvo malachei Elohim. So Jacob went on his way, and he encountered malachei Elohim. So the word for angels or messengers is malach, malachei Elohim, and these characters are not human characters. These are, we've seen messengers before. The single most, to my mind, the single most important example up until now are the four messengers who were angelic, or at least divine characters, who come to Abraham and Sarah, right, to announce that Sarah is going to have a kid in a year. So here he is, and Vayomer Yaakov ka'asher ra'a mechanem Elohim zeh vayikra shem hamakom hahu Machanaim. And when he saw them, Jacob said, "This is God's camp." So he named the place Machanaim. Now, by the way, sometimes when this happens, it is the author kind of making up a story to explain the name of a place. So here the author knows about a place called Machanaim, and it's been an established settlement for a while. And the author comes up with a story as to how it got that name. And Machanaim means two camps. And that's really all for now. Just he's leaving. He's encountered messengers from God. The text seems to be pretty clearly telling us on that account that God is that God is continuing God's presence, God's accompanying Jacob on Jacob's journey. And at the moment, the journey is not fraught. It will become fraught in just a couple of verses. But now it's just he's headed back to Canaan with his retinue, with his cows and his donkeys and his sheep and his goats and his wives and probably his handmaidens and his kids, of which I mentioned before. He's got 11 at this point. Benjamin is born a little later, and things look hunky and they look dory for the moment. But I'm not going to read the Hebrew all the time, but I just like to exercise my Hebrew a little bit. Vayishlach Yaakov malachim lefanav ve'esav echav arza seir sdei Edom. Now, before I read the translation, note the third word. For those of you who can handle the Hebrew, malachim. So now the word is being used not for divine beings, but he sent a couple guys, right? He says, "You guys can run up ahead and see what it's like. A couple miles, 3-4 miles down the road." So Jacob sent messengers. Now these are human messengers ahead to his brother Esau in the land of Seir, in the country of Edom. Just to remind you, Esau having been rejected as the family leader, he goes to live in Edom, and he's the father of the Edomites, who were not terribly friendly to the Israelites. Vayesav otam lemor, ko tol murun la'adoni le'esav, ko amar avdecha Yaakov im Lavan garti ve'acher ad ata. And he said to them, thus you shall say to my Adoni, my Lord Esau, thus says your servant Jacob, Im Lavan Garti, I've lived with Lavan all this time and remained until now I'm coming back. Now, what's the language there that he's employing, that Jacob is employing? I don't mean Hebrew. Don't tell me he's employing Hebrew. I mean, what's the tone of what he's telling the messengers?
It's very submissive.
Okay, tell me what you mean by that.
Well, he's calling Esau a lord and himself a servant. That's
Right.
submission.
Submissive is a good word. To my lord Esau. I mean, he has no idea. They haven't seen each other for 20 years, right? No letters, no emails, no Shabbos dinners, nothing. He has no idea who he's going to encounter, and this verse indicates he's at least a little worried. Anything else? I've acquired cattle, asses, sheep, male and female slaves, and I send this message to my Lord in the hope of gaining your favor. The messengers returned to Jacob, saying, we came to your brother Esau. He himself was coming to meet you with his retinue. Numbers. This is the translation is a little clunky. His retinue numbering 400. Let me look at the Hebrew. Vayeshuva malachim el Yaakov lemor, banu el achicha el Esav, v'gam holech likratcha, v'arba meot ish imo. The Hebrew is pretty clear. He too is coming toward you, and there are 400 men with him. I don't know why I don't know why they use the word retinue, but it doesn't matter. So
Is that a little bit of a threat? That
well,
he's bringing 400 people with him?
well, what do you think?
I think so. Well, didn't he already kind of do his brother in by taking over the inheritance?
Yes.
So we're seeing a little bit of Jacob here. I mean, he's nervous. That's why he sends the messengers out, and they come back and they say, "Yeah, Jack, you're screwed. He's coming with 400 people, 400 men, and doesn't say whether they're armed or not, or whether they got chariots or horses. They had chariots back then, but it's pretty clearly threatening. It's pretty clear that Esau is coming out at least to threaten, if not with the actual intention of doing Jacob bodily harm. And so what happens? So Jacob was frightened, as he should have been. Now let's see what the word is. They're translating Vayetzer in his anxiety. I'm not crazy about it. Jacob was greatly frightened. In his anxiety, he divided the people with him, the flocks and herds and camels, into two camps, thinking, if Esau comes to one camp and attacks it, the other camp may yet escape. So he's employing a kind of a strategy, right, that if Jacob attacks and the attack is fatal, half of the camp might get away. But he's also being careful. So now he reminds God. Then Jacob said, God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, Adonai, who said to me, return to your native land and I will deal bountifully with you. I am unworthy of all the kindness that you have so steadfastly shown your servant. With my staff alone I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become two camps. Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, else I fear he may come and strike me down, mothers and children alike. You have said, I will deal bountifully with you and make your offspring as the sand of the sea, which are too numerous to count. Now, just so then this reminds me of that phrase, praise the Lord and pass the ammunition, right? Here he is, he's reminding God that God made him a promise, and God, I trust in you, but just in case, and remember, God, it's through me now that the covenant is going to pass, and I'm going to be the father of a large nation, just as you promised to Abraham and before me, and to Isaac before me. And I've done my job, by the way, God. I'm a regular ultra-Orthodox guy. I've got 11 kids with one on the way. But I appear to be facing danger, right? And so keep your promise, God. But just in case, after spending the night there, he selected from what was at hand these presents for his brother Esau: 200 she-goats, 20 he-goats, 200 ewes, 20 rams, 30 milk camels with their colts, 40 cows, 10 bulls, 20 she-asses, and 10 he-asses. Okay, I'm going to take down the screen share because now I know I'm never going to have that problem again. I figured it out. What has Jacob just done? What has this move on his part shown us about Jacob? And what has he just done? Jane.
He has given, or he's giving Esau half of what he owns. He's how do I say this? He's reimbursing him for the lost inheritance.
You're being kind, but first of all, how do you know it's half of what he has? It doesn't say
Because
that.
it said, didn't it say 400 something? I'm just assuming it's half of what he
So
has.
I think it's
think
not
it's
telling
all
us
of it?
it's half.
Uh-huh.
I mean, look, there are three there, but since you brought that up, it occurs to me there are three possibilities here. One, he's giving him an enormous gift that's more than half of what he owns,
Okay.
or he's giving half of what he owns,
Mhm.
or this has always been my interpretation, but I stand to be corrected. It seems to me that this, first of all, this is a huge quantity. This is an enormous gift. This is like, millions of dollars worth of animals, right? Millions of shekels of animals. It's a very generous gift. I always thought that this is that on the one hand, it's showing us Jacob's willingness to bribe his brother, or anxiety to avoid an attack, and one way to do that is to make an enormous gift. But it's also an indicator of how much he's actually got. This is a fraction of what he has, and it's an indicator of his wealth. Now, I don't know that that's right, but that's always been my interpretation. Now, that Jane, that he's giving him half is a possibility, or even more
I
than
think
half,
I'm
because he's so
picking that
desperate.
up.
Hold on a
sorry.
second. Hold on a second.
Okay.
He's so desperate to, he's so desperate for safety. But go ahead, Jane.
I think I'm picking up the half because he divided the camp in half.
Yeah, but that's
And
good.
it seems to me that that's his strategy. So dividing things in half just seems logical to him.
It's a
That's why I
possibility.
said half.
It's a possibility, but for sure. I think it's pretty clearly a very large gift. None of us is a farmer, but them's a lot of animals that he's given away. And it's a way of praise the Lord, but here's the ammunition. I'm going to do the best I can to save my family. All right. So any other comments about that? All right.
So do you think Jacob has any guilt about outwitting Esau and fooling Isaac? Do you think that plays any part in this gift?
Again, it's open to comment. My response is, I think my response, I'm going to withhold my response until we get to the wrestling story, because I think in its quiet way, the wrestling story reveals a lot. My first reaction is there's a stunky side to Jacob, and he doesn't feel guilt. He feels fear. He's really scared. Anybody have any other comments to that question? It's a good question.
No, I agree with you. I think he's feeling the consequences of what he did. I think at this point in his character, he is just taken what he wants and not really thought of consequences or any kind of.
All right. Yeah.
Like he's apprehensive about it, but isn't he instigating the meet?
Say that again. Isn't he what?
Instigating the meet with Esau.
I don't know what that means.
he's
He asked for the meeting.
he's having his people go visit and meet with him. So bringing Esau basically back. I mean, that's what I mean by instigating the meet. So he's setting it up essentially. He's setting the wheels in turning to get Esau to know him again. But he's apprehensive about meeting him at the same time because he knows what he did. You know, he didn't do the right thing.
Right. So, and I see your hand, Jason. I'll get to you in a second. So, you know, part of what's going through my mind at the moment is a common element in fiction that, like, how did Esau know that Jacob was coming? And if you think of that question, you have to say, well, I don't know what he knew. You just have to suspend your disbelief, as you often do in a work of fiction or in a movie. You know, especially when I go to a movie, especially like one that's got a really thick adventure plot to it, and you're sucked into the movie, and you're really held riveted until you walk out of the movie. And at least sometimes it often happens to me, like how did that work? You know, that doesn't make any sense. But in the context of the movie or in the context of the story, we don't know how Esau knew. He knew. But so as far as instigating a meeting is concerned, Esau is instigating the meeting. He's coming with 400 men. But what now? This may be what you meant, Harvey. In which case, please tell me I got you right. What Jacob is trying to do is to control the meeting by sending off this gift. The meeting is going to happen because Esau is on his way with 400 men. But what Jacob is trying to do, he's prayed to God, and this is a world in which prayer to God matters in terms of the actions of men and women. And second, he's sending off millions of dollars worth of animals. So he's not instigating the meeting; he's controlling the meeting, or hopes he's controlling the meeting. Harvey, does that make sense to you?
Oops, yes, it does. I was just thinking because he sent the messengers ahead of him. You know, I'm wondering if Esau knew he was coming in the first place.
Well, the messengers, again, in the area of not wanting to beat too many dead horses, I don't see the messenger. Again, this is the sparseness of biblical text. You know, the messengers don't come and say, well, we spied from a hill, or we saw them from a distance, or we sat and had coffee. My sense is that it's sort of the former. They saw from a distance and maybe estimated the number of men. They didn't actually go. My sense of it is they didn't actually go and negotiate with Esau. They saw what was happening and ran back to let Jacob know. That seems to be, again, when I'm filling in the plot like this, that doesn't mean I'm right. You all can feel free to propose your own resolution to the question. But my sense is when you send off when you send off spies, they're not going to go and sit down and have a meal with the person or people they're spying on. They're spying and then they're coming back. Jason, I hope you're still relevant. I didn't.
Yeah, well, if I'm remembering the sequence correctly, Jacob is now returning from Laban, his uncle, right? And Laban has tricked Jacob rather dramatically into not getting his choice wife first, and has ended up having to spend many extra years there. So he's actually learned the real consequences of being tricked. And if we want to ascribe a small amount of personal growth to him, maybe this induced some guilt and made him realize that being tricked is not a great thing. And the person who receives the trick ends up with, feeling bad about it. And maybe this induces him to want to make some peace with his brother. And the other thing that, as long as we're making up things that are not in here, why not assume that maybe Esau has a conversation with God occasionally too, and has been given some direction that the time is right to make peace with your brother, and has made his way there, right? Because it's been, 20 years, and Jacob and all of them haven't been anywhere near home. For all we know, we don't even know where Esau's been, right? He's been wandering or growing he's got 400 men, right? So he's obviously done well.
Right. Right.
And has anyone been back to the homestead for 20 years? You know, who's keeping that place up? So it seems like there's a lot of possibility, but I would like to at least like to think that Jacob grew a little. I mean, that would make me feel like there's some moral factor in this, that he felt bad later. Maybe at the time he didn't, but I'd like to think he would.
All right. Wendy, I see a hand.
Yeah, hi, sorry, my camera's not working. The light's on, so it thinks it's on, but it's not working. Anyways, just want to throw it out there as a reminder, the whole idea of tricking Isaac was actually Rebecca's idea. It's not like that was something Jacob came up with on its own. It's something they kind of cooked up together.
But what does that tell you? What does that tell you about? Well, there's a cluster of issues that raises. What does that tell you?
It tells me that he felt entitled to the birthright, and that's why he went along with his mother's idea. He had a sense of entitlement there. And to be fair, Esau felt the same entitlement on his end, because by coincidence, he came out first, right?
Right.
So both brothers have this sense of entitlement. Jacob thinking he's the better man, and Esau's thinking, I'm the older one, so I should get it. So, and then of course, the problem that happens over and over again in the Torah is parents playing favorites with the kids. We see that over and over again. So,
all right. But you know, I see lurking behind this. I mean, this is why the Bible is often really good literature. This whole Esau-Jacob thing, from within the context of the Bible itself, forget about what the rabbis do with it later on, which I'll mention in a second. This whole thing with Jacob and Esau is, you don't really see Esau being bad. He doesn't do anything bad, but he's a hunter. And Jacob is the guy who stays at home with mom. And there's some sense of when, and this may be reading between the lines, but when the text tells us that at the beginning of the Jacob and Esau story, there's a sense of disapproval. Now, I may be bringing sort of, you know, Eastern European Ashkenazic sensibility to that, like Jews don't hunt. But there is a sense that, you know, Jacob is at home making porridge and Esau is out, you know, hunting game. That's one thing. At the other end, he takes wives, now I don't remember from whom, but he takes pagan wives, and mom and dad are definitely not happy with that. In the text says as much. But in between, though you don't see Esau a lot, there's not a lot about him that on the surface looks disagreeable. Yet, Isaac is blind, and one thing we kind of know about biblical literature is that physical characteristics are often intended as indicators of internal things, internal characteristics. And here I'm going to bring in a midrash, which of course is not within the text itself, but the midrash goes, when Abraham is about to plunge the knife into Isaac on top of Mount Moriah, the angels are all gathered and they all start to weep. And some of the tears fall into Isaac's eyes. And the tears in those eyes result later on in his blindness. But so he's blind. You know, it's one of the, I can't think of any other character in biblical literature who's blind, though there may be. Well, Samson blinds him. I believe he blinds him. He's blinded. So there's another character. But Isaac's blindness, I think is understood by the author to indicate that he's blind to the characteristics of his two sons. And so when it's time to pass on the blessing, the family blessing, which is the covenant, he asks Esau to go out and hunt him some food, and at the conclusion of which I'll give you the family blessing. And that's when Rebecca sets up this ruse with which Jacob goes along with. Now, here's the point. Here's the point I'm driving at. I think the text the author prefers Jacob. That although the signs about Esau being unqualified to be the bearer of the covenant, they're not that clear. There's a couple of little hints, language hints, which we're not going to go back and look at, and his choice of wives, which we're not going to go back and look at, and his his proclivity for hunting. I think all of those add up to the fact that we are supposed to think that the blessing should go to Jacob anyway. But Jacob's not he's not an angel, right? He steals the birthright at the beginning, and he's later on he's a terrible father, and so on, and at the end of his relationship with Laban, he enters into a bit of a deception there too, although Laban deceives him at first. I see your hand, Wendy. I'll get to you in a second. But the rabbinic tradition hates Esau. I mean, he's the father of Edom. That may be a dead giveaway. He's the father of Edom, an enemy of the Israelites, and a bunch of no-goodniks. And the rabbinic tradition turns him into a vile character, not at the same level as Amalek, but Esau becomes, for instance, in later literature, after the Jews have had their life with Rome, or during their life with Rome, Esau becomes a symbol for the Romans. The rabbis hate Esau; they turn him into absolute evil. But you don't see that in the characteristic here, in the story here. Wendy, what was you going to say?
Yeah, I also wanted to draw a parallel with the Cain and Abel story, because if I remember correctly, Cain was a hunter and Abel was the farmer.
Yeah.
And God preferred, Abel's sacrifice better for some unknown reason. That kind of implies the same thing, that hunting is kind of maybe frowned upon. I don't know if that's a good parallel or not, but that's just what came to mind.
Because Abel's not a hunter. But when they both bring a sacrifice, Cain brings fruit, and Abel brings domesticated animals. There's no sense he went and hunted them. So it's a nice try, but I don't think it quite works.
Okay, fair enough.
All right, so should we get back to the text? Anything else? Now that I'm embarrassed, I confess my embarrassment to you about my continuing inability to use screen share, because the solution is like ridiculously easy, but it took me a long time to figure it out. So you guys are the beneficiaries of it. So let's just review it. Like 200 she-goats, 20 he-goats, 200 ewes, 20 rams. And note the greater preponderance in each of these of female as opposed to male animals. 20 milch camels, which means camels that are lactating, I think, and they're colts. So there's 20. God knows how many colts there are. 40 cows, 10 bulls, 20 she-asses, and 10 he-asses. I mean, I think that would be a pretty nice gift even today. Someone showed up at my door with all those animals, I would feel quite wealthy. These he put in charge of his servants drove by drove, and he told his servants, go ahead and keep a distance between the droves. So there's so many, and they're different animals. I suppose that, I'm not a farmer, but I suppose batching all these animals together might be a formula for discontent among the animals. So there's a drove of camels, there's a drove of cows, of she-asses, and so forth. Now, by the way, I may have made this complaint before. Now, you all are adults, but when I use this translation with kids, and you see the word she-asses, everybody titters, right? Because it's why they can't use donkey, because it's a donkey, an ass is a donkey. I don't know, but you're all grown up, so I don't have to worry about you tittering. He put in the charge of his servants drove by drove. He instructed the one in front as follows: when my brother Esau meets you and asks you, who is your master? Where are you going? And whose animals are these? You shall answer, your servant Jacob's. They are a gift sent by my Lord, to my Lord Esau, and Jacob himself is right behind us. He gave similar instructions to the second one and the third and all the others who followed the droves, namely, thus and so shall you say to Esau when you reach him. And you shall add, and your servant Jacob himself is right behind us, for he reasoned, if I propitiate him, I want to look at the Hebrew. Why can't they use a different word? Kiamar achapra, the word here is the word for the Hebrew root for atonement. I don't know how they came to propitiate, but if I act if this gift appears that I'm acting in an atoning way, with presence in advance, and then face him, perhaps he will show me favor. And so the gift went ahead while he remained in the camp that night. So that same night he arose, taking his 2 wives, his 2 maidservants, his 11 sons, and doesn't say his daughter, but his daughter's there too. And that's something about this text, right? Why don't they mention the daughter? And he crossed the ford of the Yabok. After taking them across the stream, he sent all of his possessions. He sent across all his possessions. And we're going to come back. So we're going to get to that story in a second. So what's he doing here? So somebody just, humor me and describe what's just happened in the story. Yeah, Sandy, go ahead. You got
He sent everything on ahead, hoping that, Esau will accept this gift. But what I don't understand is why did he go in the first place?
I'm
He
sorry.
hasn't seen his brother in 20 years. Why is he going now?
Well, he's not going to see his brother. He's going home. The brother happens to be part of the problem, part of the situation.
Brother lives at home and he's going home.
Right.
Okay.
I mean, God says it's time to go home. You got to go back. You can't have, I mean, of course, the story ends. I see your hand, Betsy. The story ends, the book ends, they're back in Egypt, but you can't have a patriarch living outside of the land. He's got to go back home.
Isn't there something, wasn't he always supposed to go home when he first went to get a wife, but then he had to work 7 years for each wife? And then there's something prior to this about Rebecca trying to steal the idols, and Jacob and Laban have some kind of falling out. Right. And Jacob says, I have to go.
Right.
Because,
so it's not Jacob.
because Laban went through his stuff. Laban searched his stuff for those idols.
Rebecca, it's Rachel.
I mean Rachel.
There's this thing, and it's true that going back last week's parsha, God says, and Jacob and God have this conversation. Jacob negotiating as is his wont. He says, if you take care of me, I'll come back. I mean, there's always this sense that he has to come home. Now he's not going to get a wife. The wives are a happy event. He's just going to run away. Well, he's got to go home and live with the uncle. But what happens is not clear until it happens. So anything else? I mean, so we're all so how look. So you're reading this for the first time, and you're at the beach and you got the book of Genesis open to you. It's a nice sunny day. This is your summer reading, and now Jacob is about to encounter his brother. And so how do you, the reader, feel? If you can pretend you're hearing this or reading this for the first time.
Well, this is the moment of sort of the climax in a certain way. You want to see how this is going to resolve. This is you're now, this, as you said, the scene has been set up. Jacob has set it up to try to stay in control, and you really have no idea what the outcome is going to be. So I think as a reader for the first time, I'm kind of like, okay, so where's this going? What's happening now? Who's going to win?
And
how about they live happily ever after?
Do they?
Well, we'll see about living happily ever after.
I mean, we're at the beach reading a novel. Isn't that what's supposed to happen? That we live happily ever after? Just kidding.
Unless this is the summer you.
But they are getting together. They finally grow up.
There's this chat discussion about Esau having butchers on hand and for the animals. Well, the summer reading joke just went by, but I was going to say anyway. You usually have at least stereotypically, one has summer reading of a certain type, unless this is the summer you finally decide to read War and Peace. But there you go. And so yeah, there's a real moment of tension. And as the Bible does from time to time, it provides, we're going to have a moment outside of the tension. Although, I mean, one really good example that always comes to my mind is it happens actually later, when just after the brothers sell Joseph into slavery, and before the story continues, there's this kind of sidebar story of Judah, one of the sons, and Tamar, his on again, off again daughter-in-law, and there's a story of it's a great story, and I won't even summarize it, because when we get to it, I want to play with it. It's a wonderful story in and of itself, and it has a purpose which I'm not going to go into now, other than just breaking the tension. But its sort of primary moment in the story is to break the tension. What's going to happen to Joseph as a slave? And we have to have this little sidebar story. This story that we're about to encounter is just a few verses. It's one of the great images of all of biblical literature. I hope I don't say that too often, but you know, I suppose if I came up with a list of 20 great images of biblical literature, this would certainly be one of them. And here it's an invitation to read between the lines, which is what I'm going to invite you to do in a second. So let's bring the story up. All right, so he's all of his possessions and every blah blah blah. Vayivater Yaakov levado, vayavek ish imo ad alot hashachar. Again, biblical tale here is shrinking pages and pages into one, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 words. Right? Jacob was left alone, and a figure wrestled with him until the break of dawn. Now, what I'm about to say may be totally irrelevant. You may be sitting there going, I really want more details, Cohen. Well, why doesn't the text get? But let me remind you of the shortest short story ever written by Ernest Hemingway. It's a famous thing. A lot of you probably already know it. How's it go? Baby shoes for sale, never worn. There's a whole world in those, and I think it's 6 words. Baby shoes for sale, never. Yeah, there's a whole world in there. Well, there's a whole world in here. Vayivater Yaakov levado vayavek ish imo ad alot hashachar. A figure. Now the word here is ish. They're choosing to translate the word as figure, and I think here I kind of approve of it, because it captures an ambiguity about what or who this ish is. So I'm going to read it again. I'm going to take down the screen share so I can see all of your punums. And I'm going to ask you to help me, before we get into this any further, help me fill in some of the blanks here. This is a query of imagination, not so much of a question to be debated. Who is this man? Why is Jacob wrestling with him? What are they? And why do they wrestle till dawn? Or what is it telling you about the fact that they wrestle till dawn? Now, if you were at services last night, you have some of my interpretation of what that means, but I'm not going to say anything until you have your contributions. Oh, Gail, you got a hand up. Okay. You need to unmute, Gail.
Yeah. I guess I sort of got with a classical that he's fighting with himself. It's like I always think of that when I have a night that you're battling with, should I do this? Should I do that? Trying to do the right thing, or you know what I mean? I've always thought, I know it's a classical interpretation that this is the moment that he becomes Israel, that he changes.
Right.
Being a trickster.
Right. But what are you saying? The classical interpretation is he's wrestling with himself?
Well, maybe not. I that's an interpretation that I've read a lot, and that just
Where have
spoke.
you read it? Where have you read this interpretation?
I guess different midrash, and not midrash, different Torahs from rabbis. I think that this is what I've read, and what I've always sort of thought.
Okay, so by this interpretation, this moment, this lonely night of the soul is actually a unitary event. Correct? That's what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so he's having another dream, or he's okay. So that's a possibility. That's a possibility. Sandy.
Well, I felt like he was wrestling with an angel. Whenever it talks like that, I assumed that it was an angel he was wrestling with.
Okay, so one interpretation is it's himself confronting himself. Another is that this Ish is an angel.
Well, they don't use the word for messenger. I'm sorry, they don't use the word for messenger. They use Ish, which is like a figure, a thing.
Correct. And as I pointed out, the translators gave it an ambiguous translation, and I'll give them credit for having reason for doing it. I don't know. I mean, I think there's a contextual reason for them to do it. So it's not. I don't think it's wrong, but it's ambiguous.
Where
That's
did the idea of we don't eat steak or something because the vein that was hurt? Where did that idea come
Be patient. Be patient.
Oh,
Brett.
okay.
We'll get to that.
Okay.
Which, by the way, gives that when we get to that, I'm going to get back to your interpretation. Betsy, Jason, and Ruth.
So I really like the interpretation that he is wrestling with God, or this messenger, this, might not be an angel, but he's wrestling with God, because I think this is I don't think it's so much an internal moral moment as a spiritual moment, that this is where, we know he's going to become Israel. And I think this is, in my head, this is, and this is not unique by any sense. I mean, this is widely in the literature and all, and in many discussions, but he's wrestling with God, as we all do. It's the great metaphor for how we relate to God, and becoming Israel. This is a transitional moment in his life, as wrestling with God is for many people. So to me, it's all spiritual, and I'm perfectly okay with sort of the mythic quality of it. So.
Okay, Jason?
Well, Betsy said a lot of what I would have said, but I want to add to it that I think this reinforces the discussion we were having a bit ago about guilt, because I think you arrive at a place where you are having a moral conflict or a sense of a need for some kind of spiritual uplift when you are dealing with a challenge that is very much rooted in the earth. I mean, he's dealing with this battle, with his potential battle with his brother. He's really, it's a crossroads, right? He's at like a place in a midlife crisis, whatever you want to call it, right? He's at a place where, duty calls, and the reality of it, he's been kind of a timid guy his whole life, and now he's being asked not only to confront his brother, but also potentially go back and lead his family into generations to come, which is not for the faint of heart. So it all kind of comes together, right? If he's really believes that he's, supposed to be a patriarch, if that's really, where do you find the inner strength? I mean, you do have to consult with your better angels, or however that gets
So that's really good. You said something like it's not of the fate of heart, and so I'm thinking to myself, especially when you have 12, 13 kids. But okay, Ruth, what did you want to say?
Well, I just like to relate it to something you said yesterday. It shows the kind of strength that he had, wrestling until dawn. We don't know how long it was, but it was a fight. And the fact that he becomes Israel, and that we have never been known as the children of Abraham, the children of Jacob, but children of Israel. And today, when people talk about what has to happen in the future, and we're going through such very difficult times right now, and yet we come up with a saying, Am Yisrael Chai, Israel has to live. And it's going to take a lot of strength and it'll be very difficult. And that's something that Jacob had to struggle with. And I relate it to what we have to struggle with all the time.
You know, Ruth, if I'd have known you had that thought in you, I would have asked you last night to give the sermon. That was very good. That was very good. All right, so we're not sure. Hold on a second, Bex. But we're not sure. We're not sure who this character is. We're not sure how long this wrestling match goes for, but it's a long time, and you know it's until dawn. We don't know if it's an internal event or an external event, although I think there's a bit of evidence coming out that makes it clear from the point of view of the author that this is a physical, it's an actual, it's a reality within the context of this world that we're studying, that we're reading about. It's not our world, but it's a reality. But we'll see that in a second. And Gail, when we bring this up, you can feel free to argue with me. I'm totally open to how you might want to refute that. And Betsy, what were you going to say?
It may just be adding on to what Jason said, but I think guilt for Jacob is too small an emotion for this scene, for this episode, for all the reasons that have been said already. That it's an elevating moment. It's a moment with God. It transforms our future and who we are as a people. So I always get conflicted sometimes with the biblical characters. I'm always trying to understand them as people, you know, so I can relate to them. And they do have so many positive qualities and they have so many negative qualities as well. And it's particularly those negative ones that make them so human. But then I'm also struggling with the idea that these are patriarchs and matriarchs who are touched in some way by a divine presence. And that also makes them human, because we can all be touched by divine presence as well, maybe not to that level, so that we're leaders and founders of a people, but we are the continuation of those people. And so, yeah, when I think about guilt with Jacob, it just feels too small, particularly for this moment. So that's it.
And I'm wondering about why. I don't want to go back. I'm aware of the time already, and I want to get past this story into the rapprochement between Jacob and Esau. So I'm just going to raise the question. I don't want to pursue it any further. This is a response to what you're saying, Betsy. You know, why? What motivated Jacob to send the messengers ahead? We didn't discuss that, and I want to move forward. But the point is that there might be a sense of guilt or concern or whatever
Or
it is,
fear
or worry.
I'm not saying he doesn't have those emotions. I'm just saying that in this moment, he's beyond. What happens in his encounter with this messenger is more than that.
Okay, all right. I'm bringing up the text again. There we go. When he saw that he had not prevailed against him. Now the pronouns here are a little confusing, but it's pretty clear who he is and who him is here. Vayar ki lo yacholo vayiga b'chaf yerecho v'teika chaf yerech Yaakov v'hevak o imo. So when he saw that he had not prevailed against him, he wrenched. And by the way, it's important here. The word he prevailed is yachol. We're going to see it again in a minute. When he had not prevailed, he wrenched Jacob's hip at its socket, so that the socket of his hip was strained as he wrestled with him. So even so whatever this is, whoever this being is, Jacob has wrestled him to a draw, and as this being sees that he can't prevail, he does whatever it is he does. He wrenched Jacob's hip at his socket, as if maybe to remind him and I'd be interested in your response to this, maybe to remind him that, I could have done something here. Maybe I'm withholding some of my power. And here's a possible interpretation. If this is literally somehow the embodiment of God and not an angel and not a human, then this is a perfect example of covenant between the Israelites, the Jews, and God, wherein God limits God's power to enter into a more or less symmetrical relationship with God's people. Ultimately, this character might have just been able to defeat Jacob, and shows that by wrenching his socket, the hip in its socket. I'll let that go. But then he says that this being says, "Let me go, for dawn is breaking." But he answered, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." So this is classical Jacob, right? He's not going to let him. What do I get? What have you done for me lately, right? What am I going to get? But the angel, or this being, whatever it is prepared for this. Vayomer elav ma shmecha, ma shmecha, ma shmecha, ma shemecha, vayomer Yaakov. And he said, "What's your name?" And he replied, "Jacob." Now, for us who remember the origin of Jacob's name, he gets the name when he's grasping onto the heel of Esau as they're born. Yaakov means like heel grabber, or that's how the text understands it, heel grabber. No, what is my name? What is your name? He says, "I am called heel grabber." Vayomer lo Yaakov, Vayomer lo Yaakov ye'amer od shimcha. The guy says, "No, your name shall no longer be Jacob. Ki im Yisrael, rather you shall be called Yisrael. Ki sarita im Elohim ve'im anashim ve'tuchal, because you have striven with beings divine and human, and you have prevailed. Now the word tuchal here, you can't, if you don't know the grammar, you can't see it easily. But tuchal here is the same word as up there where it said lo yachol. He could not prevail. He, the angel, could not, whatever this being is. The angel is locked in my head. This being could not prevail. And so here the word is used in a positive sense, right? You have struggled, your life up until now has been a struggle with beings divine and human, and you have prevailed. Now, but beyond interpreting what the word Yisrael symbolizes, what does that tell us about Jacob? What is this being telling to Jacob? You've struggled with beings divine and human, and you have prevailed. Help me interpret that. Jane.
Is it saying that Jacob is equal to them?
Equal to whom?
To the angels, to the humans and angels that he has struggled with. He is equal or better than them because he has continued the course. He has not been defeated. I disagree with Jason. I've never seen Jacob as timid. I think he is very forceful. I think he's very manipulative.
Manipulative, yeah. But he's also,
Yeah.
I wasn't going to bring this up because I liked everything Jason said. But how do we know he's not timid? Well, when he gets to Haran, how does he make the acquaintance of the Mishpocha? What does he do? Anybody remember the story? There's a stone over a well, and he sees these women, and he's just shot through with testosterone, right? And he goes over and he lifts the stone off the well. So we know he's got some boldness and some strength, and testosterone. Well, we know that from his 12 kids. 13 kids. Sorry.
Yeah, that's for sure.
What else? You've struggled with beings divine and human, and you have prevailed.
He's strong.
He's strong. Okay.
I mean,
Right.
the fact that this entity, whether it's divine or semi-divine or whatever, doesn't destroy him. Let's say it's a divine messenger, okay? Even God, as Betsy said. The fact that they didn't destroy him and they could shows an enormous amount of respect on their side. This person is worth saving. Yeah, we've got to teach him a lesson or two, but this guy's a go. This guy's a go. They have respect for him on a certain level.
Okay.
Otherwise, I mean, they could just zap him. Just zap him and it's over. But
Okay.
they
Good.
didn't.
All right.
They
So,
didn't, I
Sandy,
think, for a reason.
Sandy, did you have your hand up? Okay, so Betsy, Sandy, and Wendy. And I'm not favoring my wife. I think her hand was up first. Betsy,
Jane,
Sandy.
I just wonder if the word you're looking for is that what came to my mind when I read prevailed was survived.
You know, that's a great interpretation. I really like that he is a survivor.
Yeah.
Where somebody like Abel is not a survivor.
Right.
You know?
I can't go with the idea that he's better than people or stronger than God, but I just interpreted prevailed as he survived. And if you survive, you know, relationships with human beings, and if you survive struggling with God, that's a lot. That's a lot.
It shows an inner character of Jacob that we haven't really addressed. I mean, the fact that he doesn't get the wife that he wants, and then he works 7 years for Laban to get Rachel, that also shows, you know, this inner persistence, this inner survival, as you said. He prevails over Laban because he eventually does get Rachel.
Yeah.
So,
and he doesn't stay home. I mean, he doesn't stay with Laban. He knows he has to go home, even if it's 20 years later as a patriarch. And even if he has to deal with Jacob and his fear, I think that's something. He could have stayed there, you know, and sort of shrunk from his larger task.
Oh, I need to review the story because it somewhere at the back of my head, I read something about this. And is Jacob leaving? Why is Jacob leaving? And I don't know if it's just because he feels the need to go home as much as Laban is getting greedier and greedier. And also the fact that he has 11 sons, or will have 11 sons. At this point, it's 10. He has 10 sons. What's the patrimony for these children? Where's it going to be?
Well,
and he never trusted Laban at all.
Yeah.
So I need to do more reading or research.
I think God comes to him and says, "It's time to go home, buddy." A friendly amendment. A friendly amendment. At this point, he's got 11 sons and 1 daughter. And Benjamin is 1, so he's got 12. Total of 13 kids. Sandy and then Wendy.
I was just going to say that it shows that he is now worthy of the name Israel. That's all.
Okay. Well, but there's a kind of I'm trying to think of a good word here. He gets the name because we see in this moment, this several hour wrestling match, that he's being given the name because he has everything. Much of what he's done up until now colludes to this, but now he finally earns it. He finally earns this name. Wendy, I like that. That's very good.
Yeah, my thinking when we were reading this just now, when he says you've striven with beings divine and human prevailed, it's kind of like looking at his whole life. Because look at where he is now with this huge household and all these belongings, and he's gained a lot of wealth. He's prevailed over everything that's happened in his life. And I think with the name change, I think that it could symbolize how during this struggle, during the night, he's had a shift in mindset where he's going to leave the behaviors of the past behind and move forward and try to be a better person, where you're constantly struggling with doing what's right rather than going along with what somebody else says to do.
Okay, now it's an open question, and we're not going to delve into this now, maybe next week, or well, by 2 weeks, we'll be into the Joseph story. It's an open question whether he's actually a better person. I think Jacob, and this came out earlier in the discussion, I think Jacob is a perfect example of how one can be both a spiritual and an important leader and still be a stunk. Because I don't think his stunkiness really recedes into the background so much. You see that when he raises his boys. Even at a critical moment in the Joseph story, which I don't want to, I'll put this out as a forspice. Even in the Joseph story, we see that Jacob is a bit of a stunk, and even when he blesses the boys at the end of the book of Genesis. So, and yet we are the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We are Bnei Yisrael. We are the children of Israel. And maybe, maybe if you don't want, I guess you got to go a little bit into symbolic interpretation. We are I said this last night on the Bema, we are wrestlers. We prevail over beings divine and human. And yet, Lord knows we're foolish, we're plenty stunky. And if you want to see, let's forget about the war. But if you want to see stunkiness in action, just look at Israel's political history and the leaders that state has generated, full of stunks. Jane, do you still have your hand up?
I have a question. Why does Jacob get such a new name as Israel, where Abraham just went from Avram to Abraham and just has a hey in his name, which is supposed to indicate great changes? So why does Jacob get this whole new name? Why don't we just put a hey in there somewhere? Do you understand what I'm saying? In other words, is Jacob more important than Abraham? I mean, what would up with that there's such a profound new name?
I think that question calls for a broad interpretation. Wendy, do you want to speak to this?
Yeah, I wanted to speak to something else too, but yeah, I think the big name change would imply a big transformation in Jacob's approach to his life. Because with Abraham, he was just kind of continuing on his path with the name change. Whereas going from Yaakov to Israel, it's more of I'm going to completely change what I'm doing and think about what God wants versus what the people around me want. But the other thing I wanted to mention was the shtuckiness that you were mentioning, because a relative of mine was asking me a while ago, why do we esteem these people, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, when they do things that are not so good? But I was telling him, well, we don't worship them as gods. We esteem and honor them as our ancestors, but we acknowledge their humanity at the same time.
Yeah, I think there's something to that. Betsy.
So to Jane's question, which is so interesting, I think there has to be something. I mean, what I've always heard about this is that, Abraham created our family, but Jacob created our peoplehood. And so the name change And I think, doesn't Israel mean wrestling with God? Doesn't that name mean wrestling with God?
It's purportedly an acronym, but it's a phony acronym.
Oh, okay. Well,
Hold on a second. Let me bring up the screen. We can take a look at it. Let's take a look at what this being says. All right, it's verse 29. So Vayomer lo Yaakov, Vayomer, Vayomer lo Yaakov yeomer od shimcha. Your name shall no longer be Jacob, Ki'im Yisrael, rather Israel. So how does this become? So Sarita is the sin, and the Resh is Yisrael. The Aleph is Elohim, and I don't see where the Lam. Well, I guess this is how it works. It's this. I've never done this before, so so it's the sin in the Resh in Sarita, and the Aleph and the Lamed in Elohim, and you throw a Yud in at the beginning, and that becomes Yisrael. So it's a common. So, but it's you know, other than the fact that the text says so, it's a phony acronym. But
what does it mean? Doesn't.
Well, the translation is accurate. So Rita Elohim, you struggled with being divine beings, v'iman Hashim, with people, v'tuchal, and you have prevailed.
So it doesn't really mean wrestling with God. But
well, the word sarita means it's a word I'm not totally familiar with, but they're translating it as striven. You know.
Does that come out of like the rabbinic era? Is that the rabbis playing around with this?
No, it's the text in front of you. I'm not sure what the question is.
Well, I'll just go back to my point because I mean, I always thought it meant, you know, it was interpreted as wrestling with God, and that.
Well, it says so use the word wrestling instead of striven. You have wrestled with gods and people, and you have prevailed.
Okay, but I'll just go back to my original point then, which is that Abraham, you know, had a name change because he created our family, but Jacob creates our peoplehood and gives us our peoplehood name.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Doesn't have that ale by itself have a meaning?
Say that again.
The ale doesn't, like Yisrael, the ale, but isn't that a reference to God, deity?
Yeah,
God.
yeah. It's one of the words, one of the names of God.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
I put it in the chat, but it's just a whimsical thought, but now it actually is bothering me. Why do all the prayers still say Yaakov instead of Yisrael? I mean, if his name is changed, why do we always talk about him as Jacob?
Yeah. So I once took a look at this, not doing any research about this from scholarly analysis, but look to see the instances of Yaakov, so moving forward in the text itself, forgetting about later references, identifying this person as Yaakov and Yisrael, and you would think that the word Yaakov would just fall away, but it doesn't, and I could find no rhyme or reason as to when Yisrael is used as opposed to Yaakov or vice versa. Now, why in so Baruch atah Abraham Elohei Yitzchak Elohei Yaakov instead of Elohei Yisrael? I don't. First of all, what did you say that you had that's a serious question for which I have no answer. Why isn't Elohei Yisrael? But on the other hand, I mean, one of the psalms that occur when we sing Hallel, one of my favorite songs is "B'tzeit Yisrael mi Mitzrayim Beit Yaakov me'am lo ez." So that's from a psalm. "B'tzeit Yisrael mi Mitzrayim," when Israel left Egypt, Beit Yaakov, the house of Jacob, from a foreign place. And there, Jacob and Israel are used simultaneously to one to bolster the other. As for rhyme or reason, I can't help you with that. And as to why Jacob persists in tefillah, I also can't help you. Jane and then Wendy.
One reason why we might only use the name Jacob in the prayers as opposed to Israel is that when Moses meets God at the burning bush and says, "Who are you?" And he said, "I am the God of your ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob."
Right.
So that's a confirmation from God as to who we are.
Right.
And I once had to give a Devar Torah on who is a Jew. And I said, finally, it comes down to this one passage that no matter what type of Jew you think we are, we are the followers of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's the core.
So I'm afraid your point commits the logical fallacy of begging the question. You're answering a question. You're saying God identifies God's self as Abraham, Isaac, and the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But
no, he said, "I'm the God of."
Yeah, but the question still remains: why doesn't God say Abraham, Isaac, and Israel?
I see what you're saying.
It's
But
not.
you know what? Let's go back. I'll just take a minute with this, because I was just looking at this passage again, and once again we have this very weird dialogue going on, which is that the angel asked Jacob, "What is your name?" Now the angel knows this is Jacob's name. Angels know everything. So why is he asking Jacob, "What is your name?" And I think that's to bring Jacob to full consciousness, especially after a night of wrestling, to full consciousness that something is going to change here.
Yeah.
Something big is going to happen here. And whether you think that he's wrestling with his conscience or guilt or an angel, it makes sense on every single level. Somewhere internally, Jacob is going to change.
Okay, that's really good. Yeah, of course the angel knows what Jacob's name is. Just like when God says in the Garden of Eden story, Ayeka, that's where are you? He knows where they are.
Yeah.
But it's there, and I'm not that word Ayeka in that context, by the way, has launched a million sermons, because it's it's really good. Where are you? Meaning, in a more homiletic sense, where are you? Not just Adam and Eve. And here it's the same. It's kind of functioning the same way. What's your name? And he says, "I am heel grabber," and then he says, "No, you're Israel." Now I see Jason's hand, but did anybody else? I thought I saw something.
Wendy's hand was up.
Yeah. So Wendy, and then Jason, and then Ruth.
I already addressed what I was going to say. My hand was up like way earlier, so no worries about me.
All right, Jason, and then Ruth.
Well, I want to take that last thing Jane was saying one step further, which is he's also, heel grabber was a physical activity, and it represented him at that stage of life. And now he has a new physical activity that is also a spiritual activity. And so we've gone from this, you're now, instead of grabbing on a heel, you're now a full wrestler with God. So it seems like it's a fuller picture of who he is. He's rising to his wholeness, I guess, is one way of looking at it.
Good. All right. Okay. Let's press on. I want to keep an eye on the time. Now we got a little bit of time. So Jacob asked, pray tell me your name. But he said, "You must not ask my name." And he took leave of him there. Vayomer lama ze tish'al nishmi, vayivarecho to sham. You must not ask my name. The Hebrew, it's not exactly the Hebrew. Lama zet tishal lishmi. Why are you asking my name? And then there's a word, I didn't do any research about this, I'm afraid, but then there's Vayivarech oto sham, which is translated here, and I didn't even look at this in an alternate translation, I'm afraid. But the translation is he took leave of him there. But the word is to bless. And this is the only case I'm familiar with off the top of my head, that the word to bless means to leave. But again, I have to assume that the translators knew what they were doing. And if so, they're kind of doing us a disservice, because as I've been pointing out, the repetition of words has a meaning, it has a purpose of tying things together. So now he's been blessed, and then there's a kind of a double blessing by which now he's leaving him on his own. But he's leaving him on his own, having been reinforced with something really powerful. And so Jacob named the place Peniel, meaning I've seen divine being face to face, yet my life has been preserved. So Peniel means the face of God. Ki ra'iti Elohim panim el panim v'tinatzel nafshi. I've seen God face to face, or their translation, a divine being. V'tinatzel nafshi, and my life has been nonetheless preserved. So he recognizes the power of the moment. And now here I want to get back to Gail's comment earlier, and I got a couple of different things to say. Vayizrach lo hashemesh ka'asher avar el penuel v'hu tzolea al yurecho. So the sun rose upon him as he passed, and then they changed the name inexplicably from Peniel to Penuel, limping on his hip. Now, that tells me that in the point of view of the author, and in the reality, in the world building that the author does, the author sees this as an actual story. He doesn't see this as some psychological moment of self-confrontation, because he sustains an injury. The story says that this being injured him. He sustains the injury, and it's with him presumably for the rest of his life. That is why the children of Israel to this day do not eat the thigh muscle that is on the socket of the hip, since Jacob's hip socket was wrenched at the thigh muscle. So those who observe kashrut can't eat filet mignon or sirloin. Now, a quick story. So there was a meat restaurant in Jerusalem, in the German colony, called Norman's, and it was a gathering place for tourists. Israelis don't eat a lot of meat, so it was a gathering place for American, North and South American tourists. It was a kosher restaurant. That's an important point. And I was there like around 2001 during the second Intifada for the Hartman Institute, this rabbinic gathering, annual rabbinic gathering. And we saw out front that they were serving, it was the 4th of July. So that's an important point. It was July 4th, and they had some kind of image of Uncle Sam out there. And on the board, it said filet mignon. So we walked in and we had filet mignon because it's a kosher restaurant. Everybody in that group was shomer kashrut. And I later found that in the kosher meat industry, so the question is, how could you have kosher filet mignon when this text tells us that we can't have sirloin steak and filet mignon? For the most part, in the international kosher meat industry, rather than try and sift through the parts of the cow to produce filet mignon, those parts of the animal are given to Gentile stores, because of course Gentiles don't have this limitation. In Israel, or maybe in other places as well, for a slaughterer who wants to take the time, you can apparently work through the slaughtered animal, and if you want to take the time, the labor, you can produce filet mignon or sirloin steak, but it's a lot of work. So ordinarily butchers elect not to do the work, but it can be done so that on the 4th of July in 2001, a bunch of rabbis from Hartman Institute could have filet mignon on the 4th of July. I think Wendy was first and then Betsy.
Yeah, two things. What it was explained to me with the kosher filet mignon, if the butcher is careful to remove the sciatica, then it's okay. That's what I
Yeah, that's what I just said, except I didn't remember the name sciatica.
Yeah,
Exactly.
the sciatica vein, the sciatica nerve. The other thing I wanted to point out was here in verse 33, it says Bnei Yisrael. It's telling us the children of Israel here, not the children of Jacob in verse 33 that you just wrote. So that might be a hint on why we call ourselves Bnei Yisrael, not Bnei Yaakov. It's here in the text.
Okay, so that raises and perhaps answers, that's a very good point. I'm glad you pointed that out. So this tells us a couple of things. One, that the author of the story is writing this story as an event that happened a long time ago. How did we get the name? And in a way, the author is answering the question. We were known as Bnei Yisrael, the author is saying. How did we get that name? And so he creates this story to explain, this is the origin story of us. Because this verse tells us it's written, supposedly from a historical perspective. Right? The author may, I don't know, I don't know what was on the author's mind when he wrote this. He may think he's writing a history. He may think that he's concocting a story. I believe it's a story, but it's the origin story of us. And I'm glad you pointed that out, Wendy. And I'll leave that. Betsy, what do you want to say?
So if you don't want to go here, that's okay, but I have a question. In the verse before, I have never understood that verse. If Jacob named the place the face of God, so there's no doubt that this messenger that he was wrestling with was God, then how can he have seen a divine being face to face? Even Moses couldn't see God face to face. I don't understand why it says that.
Okay, so after the golden calf incident, and the whole rebellion has been quelled, Moses and God have a moment. It's a great story, another one of those great images. It's actually an absence of an image. They're having a moment, and Moses says to God, "Let me see your Hareini na et kavodecha," one of the few texts I have memorized. Please show me your essence. And God responds and says, no one can see my face and live, but I'll show you my back. And then God proceeds to lift Moses up, put him in a cleft of a rock. But we don't the narrator doesn't actually tell us then that Moses sees God's back. That's what I meant by the absence of an image. We have to imagine it ourselves. Yet at the end of the book of Deuteronomy, when Moses is being praised after having died, it's the very end of the book of Deuteronomy. God says, the narrator says that Moses saw no other prophet had seen God face to face. So the question is, what does that mean at the end of the book of Deuteronomy as compared to the story in the book of Exodus that God says you can't see my face? Well, this leads me to take on a Maimonidean. What I would guess Maimonides would say about this, and that is that what Jacob is saying, I've seen God face to face. I've seen that whatever divine being face to face is, it's a metaphor for. I've just had this very, very close, precarious encounter with a being I'm presuming is divine, and maybe Jacob himself doesn't know exactly what's happened, but I mean he's had this experience, and Lord knows what we can only imagine what the internal experience is when this being renames Jacob. So my answer is it's a metaphor, and you don't have to. I don't think you have to make it more literal than that. It's that Jacob, has just had this very powerful moment with a being he's presuming is divine, and I think we're left to presume that as well. I don't know how good an answer that is, but that's the best answer I can come up with.
It's funny because things go back and forth between being literal and sort of metaphoric. He comes out with a limp, and we take that as being an actual thing that happened. The line before, when you're wrestling with somebody, of course you're going to see their face. You are going to be face to face, and yet that we're going to interpret as being a metaphor because we can't see God's face, really. So it's interesting how we have to kind of,
Right.
I don't know,
So I have a possible
work our way through it.
I have a possible response to that, and then I'll let Gail, and then I want to get onto this meeting with Esau. The issue of Jacob's hip being wrenched out of its socket is told to us by the narrator. The encounter face to face is given to us in dialogue, and so Jacob is making his own assessment of the moment, which we don't necessarily have to accept. It's his own interpretation of the moment, which may be correct, it may not be correct, but I think for our purposes, and now I'm putting on my Maimonides hat. We don't take it literally. We have to interpret it. Gail?
I just thought that I'm thinking of I think it was Isaiah who said that God was a silent, or he found God in the silent voice inside of us, or
No,
inside still silent.
The narrator says that in the story of Elijah.
Yeah.
Not Isaiah.
Okay. Right. It's been a while since I've read these stories, but that God is inside of us. And that's why I always guess I thought it was a metaphor of him struggling with himself, because you can't see God. And when you are quiet, I mean, that's Elohim, right? That we're made in the image of God, that God is inside of us, so that he's wrestling with, I guess, with himself. That's how I know he got a physical injury. I was remembering that too. But then it's a nerve that maybe you could, I'm not, it's a nerve you could sustain when you're laying on a rock in the middle of wherever. You get up, and often I get up and I can't move my hip. It's not torn.
I'm not, look, Gail, I'm not going to take this to the mats.
Right. Okay.
This is a 5 or 6 verse story that's open to great interpretation.
Right.
My view of it is that the author intends this to be in the world, again, in the world that he's building. He's intending this to be an actual event, but that's me. That's just me. I'm just a poor country rabbi trying to make a living. Yeah. Wendy, you got the floor.
I wanted to mention that a few months ago, I had a conversation about this story with a friend of mine who was raised Catholic. And he's like, oh yeah, the angel had to leave because if the sun came up and Jacob actually saw his face, he would have died. The text doesn't say that. So I was wondering if it was a Catholic translation or if you've heard that elsewhere.
Well, first of all, we got 20 minutes before I'm going to call it a day. But you guys always raise these terrific questions. All right, translation. A much larger topic than I'm going to allow for the moment, but any translation that's worth its salt is not going to be intentionally created to reflect a particular viewpoint. You can give me examples how, like in the King James translation, which by the way is an excellent translation, there seem to be moments of anticipation of Christ. I'll give you that. But there, in the best of all possible worlds, and in terms of biblical translation, we live in such a world. It may not be the best of all possible worlds for a lot of other things, but in the world of biblical translation, we live in a time of authentic attempts at authentic translation of the Bible. There's no such thing as a Jewish interpretation, a Jewish translation, a Catholic translation, a Baha'i translation. The people or persons who are gathering to translate the Bible because of the weight of its, its meaning in history, will not intentionally weigh the translation in favor of this belief or that. So I want to put that aside. Now, I once heard, and I never asked the person to give me the full detail. I once heard that the being was somehow diabolical. Doesn't fit into the story so much. It's a shade, a being that lives in the night, which is why he has to leave at sunrise. So all this just adds to the ambiguity. The literature often asks us to be comfortable with ambiguity, and I'm going to just say that you have to do that. But I want to get onto this because this is a fun part of the story. All right. So Jacob saw Esau coming with a retinue of 400. He divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the two maids, putting the maids and their children first, Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph last. Now, Rashi points this out, but you don't need Rashi to point this out. What is he saying? He originally divided the camp, and now I guess they're walking together, united during the day. And he's saying, if my people are going to be slaughtered, all right, let them do the maids and their children. And if they're going to be slaughtered, all right. So then Leah and her children, leaving the possibility of Rachel and Joseph last. Rachel is now pregnant with Benjamin. So the favored wife has the favored position in the group that's about to be confronted by 400 armed men. He himself went on ahead and bowed low to the ground 7 times until he was near his brother. So the picture here is he's saying, I don't know, 25 yards from Esau, and he bows. And then he's 20 yards and he bows, and 15, and he's bowing 7 times in an act of obeisance, right? Subservience. Oh my Lord, here I am. And then what happens now? So Vayarach Esav likrato, and Jacob ran to meet him. He embraced him, Vayipol al tzavaro, and he fell onto his neck. Vayishakehu vayivku. So those of you who can follow the Hebrew, I invite you to look at the second to the last word, Vayishakehu, and look at those 4 asterisky things above the word. It's a key interpretation. It's not necessarily the meaning, but it's open to what is happening is open to interpretation. On the one hand, Esau runs up to his brother, leaving behind his retinue of 400 armed men, and they hug, and he hugs him. So whatever ambivalence or fear Jacob has, the brother, who's the more powerful person at the moment, gives him a big hug, and then there's this funny thing. He falls on his neck, and he kissed him. So Esau kisses Jacob. Now, those 4 dots are a trope mark called shalshelet, and it's the longest. It's the longest of the trope marks in the whole Hebrew Bible, and it appears only a few times. And it goes something like this: Vayishakehu. Did it very badly, but it's like that. So the question is. Now, by the way, the trope marks are not original with the Hebrew text. You know that, right? It's a system created, I want to say, in the 5th or 6th century by a group known as the Masoretes, who also put the voweling into the text. So the Masoretes, are telling us something that they may be reflective of an older tradition. It probably is. And so the question is, is he really kissing him? I mean, I looked at some commentaries, and as you might expect, the commentaries are contradictory one to the other. So one commentator says Esau doesn't really mean it. He's doing this out of kind of a sense of formality. The other interpretation says Esau is full of rachmanis for his brother. He's forgiving of what his brother did, and they're really kissing. And that's verified, or at least bolstered, by the last word, vayivku, and they cried. they both cried that this is a moment of great, this is a moment, appears to be a moment of reconciliation. I once also heard, and I've never heard this again, and I've never seen it written down, but it's a fun interpretation anyway, whether it bears up or not. But you pull out Savaro, and he fell on his neck and he kissed him. So the way I heard this, and I heard this from my teacher Norbert Samuelson, but I don't think he actually heard it from an authentic, I don't think he actually read it from a commentator. He said one day, I heard Norbert said that this was that there was a Transylvanian rabbi who says that Esau was a vampire, and he's actually sucking Jacob's blood. And it's a cute interpretation. I don't think it holds up, but I bring it up because it's fun. And looking about, he saw the women and children. Who, he asked, are these with you? And he, Jacob, answered, the children with whom God has favored your servant. Then the maids and their children came forward, and they bowed low. Next, Leah and her children came forward and bowed low. And last, Joseph and Rachel came forward and bowed low. Now note, although one reason that this is one possible reason that Joseph is mentioned here, and none of the other kids are mentioned by name, is that Rachel only has one kid at this point. But another may be that this is a bit of a foreshadowing of Joseph's importance in this book moving forward. But they all came forward. Each of these separated groups come forward, and they're all bowing low, and they're all relieved that they're not going to be slaughtered. And he asked, "What do you mean by all this company which I have met?" He answered, "To gain my Lord's favor. I'm bribing you, brother." And by the company, he means all the animals. And Esau said, "I have enough, my brother. Let what you have remain yours." But Jacob said, "No, I pray you, if you would do me this favor, accept from me this gift, for to see your face is like seeing the face of God, and you have received me favorably." Now, let's look at the Hebrew. And then I want to talk about, and I'm open to your response, your interpretation also. But note, getting back to what he said earlier about Paniel, I've seen God face to face. Al ken ra'iti panecha kirot panei Elohim. I have seen your face as if I'm seeing the face of God, right? But tirtzeni, you've received me favorably. So Jacob, this tells us that Jacob is open to a bit of hyperbole, which might be what we can ascribe the earlier statement to. Although there, I'll use the word ambiguous again. That's more ambiguous. Here I'm reading this, and I'm open to any suggestions you have. But Baruch Hashem, Jacob is saying, I'm really, really happy that you're not that this is ending so well. Whether my prayer affected your attitude toward me, whether this bribe affected your attitude toward me, whether you happened to be coming with 400 men and you really meant me no harm, but you just wanted to show me you had 400 men. Whatever it is, Baruch Hashem, I'm totally relieved I can come home and I don't have to worry about actual physical conflict with you, my brother. Now what's going on the top of that is there's a real negotiation happening here. I don't think that Esau is really saying, I don't want your animals. And I don't think Jacob is saying, accept this gift because seeing your face is like seeing the face of God. Jacob is saying, I have bribed you, take these animals, Baruch Hashem, this may have been the turning point in your decision as to whether you're going to attack me or not. And I know, and by the way, Esau, I know damn well that you really want these animals. You're being Middle Easternly polite in this negotiation. But I suspect I Cohen suspect that if Jacob said, all right, I'll keep the animals, that's just a couple $1 million of my wealth, you don't need it, that's fine. I think the 400 men would have found a job to do rather quickly, and it would have ended. This is like Middle Eastern negotiation stuff. Just like when Sarah dies and Abraham wants a choice burial plot, and he has to negotiate with this guy named Zohar. And Zohar is going, I don't want all this money. You don't want all this money. Abraham offers him a lot of money. And he says, I don't really want the money, but he really does want the money. Here Esau is saying, I don't want these animals, but he really wants the animals. Please accept my present, which has been brought to you, for God has fully favored me, and I have plenty. And when he urged him, he accepted. But he had to urge him. And Esau said, let us start now. Now here's this gets to the point where I think it's a little funny, if only sardonic and maybe not funny. So Esau says, let's start our journey, and I'll proceed at your pace. I've got these 400, these 400 starkers, and you've got the women and the kids and the animals, and maybe a couple of starkers, but not so many. We'll all walk together back home. But Jacob says to him, my Lord knows that the children are frail, and that the flocks and the herds which are nursing are a care to me. If they are driven hard a single day, the flocks will die. Esau, thanks a lot, man, but the slow pace that you would want is too fast a pace, he's saying, for me and the animals and the kids. We need to go real slow. Let my Lord go on ahead of his servants while I travel slowly at the pace of the cattle before me and at the pace of the children until I come to my Lord in Seir. Now, I know what's going to come in the next verse or two. It seems to me this reconciliation is sufficient enough so that Jacob knows he's not in danger, but he's not totally comfortable with this guy. Esau is saying, me and my 400 men, we're going to go with you. We're going to guard you, protect you. We're going to take care of you, and we'll go at your pace. But in the back of Jacob's mind, he's saying, I'm not totally comfortable with this. You go ahead, and I'll meet you in Seir. Okay. Esau said, let me assign some of the people who are with me. But he said, oh, no, my Lord is too kind to me. He's saying, let me give you 20 or 30 of my men. And he goes, no, that's okay. So Esau started started that day on his way to Seir. All right, no, I don't give you any guards. I'm not walking with you. I'll meet you in Seir. I'll see you in 48 or 72 hours. And, we'll sit down and we'll have hummus together. But what happens? But Jacob journeyed on to Sukkot and built a house for himself and made stalls for his cattle. That is why the place is called Sukkot. And that's another origin story, right? We know why Peniel gets its name. Now we know why this place called Sukkot gets its name. He never wanted to go to Seir. He never wanted to live with his brother, right? So Esau goes to the left, Jacob goes to the right, and maybe they never see each other again, whatever. And who the character Esau is is still left a little bit in the open. He doesn't seem to be doing anything bad, right? Doesn't seem to be, not openly, but between the lines we can see at least that Jacob distrusts him. Whether that distrust is deserved or not is another story. So that's the story. He wrestles with a divine being. He reconciles with his brother. Brother goes to Seir. He goes to Sukkot, and the Jacob story continues. Questions or comments? Sandy.
These two places, does he pass through Sayet, whatever that place is, to get to the Sukkot, or are they in
We'd have to get a map out. I can't tell you.
Okay.
I can't tell you. Sorry about that. Ancient Near Eastern geography is something that always seems unimportant to me, which may be wrong, but anyway, I can't tell you. I mean, to me, the point is that he went to a totally different place and set up stalls and so on. So Betsy?
Well, we do know they see each other one more time, right? Isn't it at Isaac's funeral?
I don't think so.
They never see each other. I thought when did they go?
I'm thinking of Isaac and Ishmael.
Oh, you're right. I am. Okay, so there's nothing else. That's it. We never have them come together.
I won't put money on it, but I think so.
Okay, not in the text at any rate. Okay.
They're not in the text. Yeah, they run into each other at a Kmart every now and then, but otherwise not so much. Anything
No, it's
else?
Trader Joe's.
Trader Joe's. Did I see another hand? Yeah, the hummus at Trader Joe's is pretty good. All right, so it's another great story, and you guys raised some really good questions. See you in 2 weeks. Well, I hope to see you next Friday at the BYOM. I'm looking to see how we do it. So Shabbat Shalom, Shavua Tov, Kol Tuv, Yalla Bye. And maybe I'll see you cleaning up the backyard tomorrow at the temple. I will be teaching. No rake for me.
Shabbat shalom, everyone.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.